Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski, and it's my pleasure to once again welcome you to our webinar series show. This afternoon, we have the privilege and opportunity to talk to our friend Hagar Chemali. Hagar is a prolific analyst, a political satirist. She's a foreign policy expert. She's been all over the place, really discussing the ins and outs of Lebanon foreign policy in the Middle East for years. She has been, there does deep dives and on the understanding of the culture and the political zeitgeist of a lot of Middle East culture and politics in a way that nobody else can really dive into it like she does. So we're fortunate to have her this afternoon, and obviously there's a lot to discuss and unpack. Hagar will talk about really the latest when it comes to Lebanon versus Hezbollah and how it all relates to the larger multi-front war with Iran. As those of you who've been with us in the past know, Hagar will talk for about 20 to 25 minutes. Then we'll go into Q&A. Q&A will be done via the chat. So all you have to do is type in your questions, and we'll do our best to get all the questions in a timely fashion. If we don't, as always, I apologize in advance, and we'll do our best to respond after the show. But really, without further ado, Hagar, welcome to our program. And the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Asaf. That was such a nice introduction. I'm so excited to be here. Um, I'll add as well my background. I was in the U.S. government for a long time, and Asaf, that's my mistake. I saw that I forgot to send you my bio, so I apologize for that. I worked in the U.S. government for 12 years in national security and public affairs. And handling Lebanon and the Levant for a long period of that time. So I was at the U.S. Treasury Department working in sanctions and counter illicit finance at an office called the Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes. This was the office that was set up after 9/11 to hunt down the assets of Al Qaeda and bin Laden. And then from there, we discovered we could use those financial tools to achieve a wide range of foreign policy objectives. So I handled the Middle East then. And then I was at the White House. I was director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council. That was from the beginning of 2010 to the end of 2012. And so I was there to oversee, I was there when the Saad Hariri, which was one of the very pro-moderate, pro-West governments, collapsed. And I was there for the first 2 years of the Syria crisis. And while I was there, I discovered this love of strategic communications and media engagement. So I went back to Treasury and became spokesperson and finished my government career at the US mission to the UN, where I was spokesperson and comms director there.
And so,
And
so nobody else could say all of that without you saying it directly coming from you. So I'm happy that you were able to say all of that and make sure that I don't miss any points on your impressive and important bio. So
No, it's important because in this world, people are like, "Well, who are you to talk about Lebanon? What are your credentials?" So,
um,
I have been focused on Lebanon for a very long period of time, but including from the U.S. government perspective. And
all
so I'm
good.
excited to talk now because we're at such an exciting time with what's happening between Lebanon and Israel in general. I know that sounds like a very positive spin, so I'm going to explain that positive outlook. I will tell you that I tend to be optimistic. I always joke that if you work in national security and you're not optimistic, then how are you going to get out of bed in the morning? But this is a file that really where there's a lot of reason for hope. And that hope really started in at the beginning of 2025, and that's when I started working on Lebanon-Israel peace efforts. I now have an organization, a lobbying and advocacy organization called the Lebanon-Israel Peace Alliance. And I will get to that because we launched very recently and very unexpectedly, actually, earlier than we were ready. But it's been wonderful so far. But the reason I date back to January 2025 is it because it followed two major milestones that made me and a number of people see the opportunity for peace. And that was following the real decapitation of Hezbollah in the fall of 2024, when you had the escalation, Hezbollah Israel escalation, and Israel really assassinated a number of leaders. They had the pager explosion operation, as I'm sure you all remember, and really and targeted a number of their missiles and really undermined them. They still exist and they were still there in Lebanon, but they were hit really hard. And then you had the November 2024 ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. And following that, you had unexpectedly Bashar al-Assad collapse, fall, and run like a coward to Moscow. And those two major milestones, the decapitation of Hezbollah and the fall of Bashar al-Assad, are really what removed the noose around Lebanon's neck. And so suddenly in January, the Lebanese kind of woke up and figured that they could be sovereign, that they could make decisions for themselves. And they elected a president, President Joseph Aoun, who remains president. And after not having a president for 2 years, because Hezbollah had blocked the political process for that. That wasn't the first time that Hezbollah did that, by the way. I would argue that since the collapse of the Hariri government in 2011, Hezbollah has just really encroached in its control and influence over Lebanon altogether. And so suddenly you had the country breathe again. They elect a president, and that president last January, he made a statement on the floor of the parliament, his first statement, where he said that the weapons in the country would be under the monopoly of the state. The state would be the only one should have control over weapons in the state. So he comes out with this statement in general. Fast forward a bit, you have a cabinet that is appointed. I don't love everybody in the cabinet. And I will tell you, the Prime Minister Nawaf Salam gets appointed. There are pros and cons to him and to what he's been able to achieve. Nonetheless, he was appointed. It's technically a technocrat cabinet. And then you have the appointment of a central bank governor in April, who is extremely, sorry to shake that, extremely anti-Hezbollah and working on counter-Hezbollah financing efforts. And then you get up to August, and August of last year, which is a big deal because the cabinet decides under pressure of under the United States through this mechanism that they had. The mechanism is something that was set up during the November 2024 ceasefire. It was literally a mechanism through which the IDF would pass coordinates to the Lebanese military through the United States military regarding the location of Hezbollah arsenals, missiles, weapons depots, and so on, particularly in the south. So, given that pressure to disarm and pursue disarmament, which was stipulated in that ceasefire agreement, the Lebanese cabinet in August of last year finally makes the decision that they must disarm. It's a cabinet decision. They task the military to carry that out. In September, the military comes up with their plan, and they are told they have to disarm by the end of 2025. They have to disarm the area south of the Litani River, by the end of 2025, and then the remainder of Hezbollah in a very vague timeline after that. So disarmament goes on, but then there are some points at which it looks positive, where you have battalions that do carry out the destruction or seizing of weapons that is given to them by the IDF. And then many other times where those battalions either don't carry it out at all, or where they straight up coordinate with Hezbollah to tell them, hey, we're going to be in this area. And so, you should know that in advance. And, there are many reasons they were doing that, likely a mix of sympathizers, those who are just fearful for what Hezbollah could do to their families. And thirdly, just a general, it's not a professional army. The Lebanese armed forces and all my contacts at CENTCOM and the Marines tell me this all the time, that it is a very good army. It is an army worth investing in. But their salaries are very low. A lot of the soldiers have 2 or 3 jobs. And so they don't necessarily feel the need to put their lives on the line to destroy or seize Hezbollah weapons when they're getting paid something like $300 a month. So a mix of all of these factors ended up resulting in a situation where throughout last fall, we got to a point where Hezbollah was rebuilding and rearming at a rate that was faster than the Israeli strikes could keep up. So even though you had this ceasefire agreement in November 2024, Israel had the right, as it does now with the current ceasefire, by the way, to respond to Hezbollah attacks or preempt Hezbollah attacks. And so that's why you saw continued Israeli strikes throughout the year. They averaged around twice a day. And it was going well for a while there, to be honest with you, between disarmament and those strikes. But somewhere around the fall of last year, when the Lebanese government made this decision loudly to pursue disarmament wholeheartedly, we saw Hezbollah find its workarounds. And I can tell you, having worked in counter-terrorist financing, that all targets, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. They find a way to evade, whether it's sanctions or arms embargoes or whatever it is, they find ways to adapt and to finance themselves again and rearm and so on. And so by the fall of last year, Hezbollah had found that. And the US government warned the Lebanese government over and over again, if you don't take disarmament seriously, you're going to land in round two. Round two meaning another escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. And we didn't really know how it would happen, but a lot of us working on peace efforts assumed that we would get that round two was inevitable. And either because Hezbollah would do something stupid, or because of escalation with Iran, and that is exactly what happened. So reasons for hope, because you see the government trying to to do a big talk, to flex its muscles, but also not very good on the enforcement side. So some progress and setbacks. Still reason to have hope. The Iran war started, obviously, end of February, as we all know, and just days later, after the Lebanese government warned anybody against getting involved, Hezbollah showed its true colors as an Iranian proxy and lobbed missiles from the south, by the way, from an area I would note was deemed disarmed by the Lebanese prime minister. On December 31st, he had declared the south fully disarmed, which is somewhat of a joke since a lot of the violence and missiles have been launched from the south of Lebanon, by the way. But anyway, days after the Iran war starts, the Hezbollah enters itself into this war, and we knew, those of us working on these issues very closely, we knew that this would be an escalation that would be bigger than the one that took place in 2024, not because Israel wanted it. On the contrary, in fact, in the year and a half running up to it, many of us would tell the Israelis, in order to get to peace, we need to see some kind of escalation. We need to see Hezbollah hit back down again. And the Israelis were not interested in that. After 2 years in Gaza, they were tired. They wanted their soldiers back in the workforce. They viewed an escalation against Hezbollah as largely a charity case for the Lebanese, that this was the dirty work of the Lebanese government, and why should the Israelis carry it out? And they're not totally wrong in that view, by the way. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean they weren't prepared. They were absolutely prepared if Hezbollah tried anything. And they very much wanted to send a message of, we're not doing this every other year. This time we're going to beat you down, and we need to pivot to peace. And you saw that play out. So you saw this significant escalation. And what's remarkable was the shift in the country. So you really saw more than ever, much more than after October 7, when Hezbollah entered the war and the Lebanese were pissed about it. This time it was another level of anger toward Hezbollah for inviting war into the country, where the country really felt, you know what, you were asked not to get involved. Clearly you have only foreign interests at heart, the Iranian regimes. You are using Lebanese territory as a launch pad for your war. And I think the reason that hit harder this time than in 2023 and 4 is because after 2023, after 2006, after the 2006 war, Hezbollah paid for the reconstruction that it had invited. They paid for everything. But after the escalation in 2023 and 2024, they had no money left. So there are a number of people who remain displaced, people who've not been able to return to their homes in the South. So people who are really questioning that kind of mantra that Hezbollah always portrayed as kind of this big father, as the protector, as, and by the way, as an organization that always gave money to the Shia in the South. And suddenly they invite a war in, their houses get destroyed, and they're not paying to rebuild it. And so with this war, people, that was all the more, that sentiment was all the more acute. And this feeling of, why should we be loyal to you when all you do is invite these wars, you destroy our livelihoods and our homes, and you're not paying to fix it. So the whole country you see was swept by this anger toward Hezbollah, and also, thankfully, music to my ears, a desire for peace with Israel. And I'm going to get to that. So on vis-a-vis Hezbollah, you saw the government declare Hezbollah's military and security operations as illegal, which is fantastic. They, again, a lot of words, we need more on enforcement. They arrested a number of Hezbollah fighters, again, which is impressive, but then they released them a day or two later on $21 bail, which is absurd, as I'm sure you can guess in my tone. So you see Hezbollah trying to flex its muscles, threatening civil war, threatening to turn violence internal. Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General of Hezbollah, saying that they don't believe that Lebanon should be engaging in talks with Israel unless there's a quote national consensus, which has been laughed at by everybody, by the government, by civilians, by media anchors, and the point they make rightfully is that Hezbollah certainly didn't ask for the national consensus when it decided to take the country into a war. So you do see Hezbollah still there, but it's weak again, which is good. And you see the Lebanese, eating their spinach and starting to flex their muscles again. And now, thankfully, because of a really brilliant maneuver, I would say, by the US ambassador to Lebanon, Michel Issa, he maneuvered to set up to arrange peace talks that took place. The first of those peace talks took place on April 14th, 2 weeks ago, in Washington. And the reason I say it was a brilliant maneuver is because right when the war started, the Lebanese government said they wanted to dialogue with Israel. And neither the US nor Israel were interested. And the reason was, as I mentioned before, that they don't want to do this every other year. This isn't about just getting a ceasefire. It has to be a permanent solution. And so they let the war go on for a little longer. And until the week before those peace talks, when there was one particular attack in Beirut that took place the week before the peace talks that was particularly brutal. It was 100 strikes in 10 minutes in the center of Beirut. The Israelis are very good about warning the Lebanese on those strikes. There is kind of a running joke in Lebanon for when they say that they don't trust the Israelis, and yet when the Israelis tell them, we are going to strike at this day, at this time, please be at least 300 meters away, that a Lebanese will literally go 300 meters away, trusting fully that that's all that will get struck, and they whip out their phones. So that's what the Lebanese had gotten used to. And in a matter of 10 minutes, you had 100 strikes in the center of Beirut, and it really caused panic across the city. I will tell you something that the media to this day is terrible about highlighting, which is that while there were civilians that died in that attack, it's somewhere around a total of about 300, over 300 died in that attack. Between 2 and 250 were combatants for Hezbollah. And that is, and I'm not trying to dismiss the death of the civilians, but I do think it's very important to understand those numbers. That's why you had this sudden assault in the center of Beirut. It wasn't deliberately meant to be some kind of punishment to all the Lebanese, though it is always awful, of course, when you have the death of civilians. So after that assault came at the time period where Trump was pursuing talks with Iran, and they had declared a hold on everything happening in Iran. And the Iranian regime tried to insert the Lebanon file into the talks and said, well, if we're going to have a ceasefire, we have to have one in Lebanon as well. And for multiple reasons, nobody, not the Lebanese, not the Israelis, not the US, nobody wants Lebanon to be associated or tied to the Iran talks, even though there is a subtle tie, and I'll get to that later. So Trump did not want Lebanon to be an issue in Islamabad. He did not want it coming up. He didn't want it being a sticking or sore point. The goals in Lebanon are very different. And so, and it's not a good thing for Lebanon to be under the thumb of the Iranian regime. And the Lebanese prime minister said as much, by the way. So Trump went to Netanyahu and said, you can't do an assault like that again, like the one that happened in Beirut. You can't do what you need. You got to hold it back. And we need to bring you both to the table because I can't have this be an issue. So that's how peace talks took place. That was the motivating factor. The ambassador to Lebanon, Michel Issa, knowing that the French, Turks, Egyptians, and Qataris all wanted to be involved, and all of them, and I'm very blunt, by the way, would have played a spoiler role. I'm sorry to say that. Michel Issa maneuvered to have the talks take place in Washington, D.C., with the ambassadors in Washington, D.C. only. That was his idea, and he did that in order to prevent other countries from interfering, because they would not have interfered. It wouldn't have been productive. They have different goals and agendas, none of which are pro-peace, by the way. So for those four countries. So the US was not going to have that. So peace talks get launched. There have been two since then. They have been amazing to see because You are seeing the Lebanese and Israeli flag next to each other, Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors literally standing next to each other. From what from what I know from everybody in government, and like I said, I'm working actively behind the scenes on these efforts. Everyone's been quite happy with the two talks that took place. The second one that took place last Thursday was hosted at the last minute at the White House by President Trump himself. Um, and the reason is because he sees the potential for a win here. And and he's right. And he's right. And elevating it to that level really makes a significant difference because it means that whatever demands the US makes of both sides uh, are going to weigh more heavily. It's going to be harder for the parties to say no. And there's a clear desire to get to yes on this topic. And that's clear from all the participants in this, that they've already committed in their talks, they have committed to reaching a comprehensive peace deal at the end of this process. I can't guarantee it's going to happen, but that's the commitment they've made, that this isn't just about reaching a ceasefire to talk about the terms of disarmament again. This is about something comprehensive for a permanent solution. And an element of it will be disarmament, but there will be many other elements to it as well. Political restructuring in Lebanon to ensure that Hezbollah doesn't have influence anymore. Sanctions, again, of course, further undermining Hezbollah's financial networks. The terms that Israel will need for eventual withdrawal. Israel right now is I believe 8 kilometers into Lebanon, basically up to the Litani River. They are up to the Litani River. That might be 18 kilometers. I'm not very good at that part, but if I look at a map, I could show you where it is. That's basically a third or a fourth into the country. They have blown up the bridges over the Litani River that basically connect the rest of Lebanon to the south because their goal is to secure the south and make sure that Hezbollah can't use it to launch missiles against the north of Israel, use tanks, blah, blah, blah. And so that's where they are now. So that deal will also stipulate the terms of withdrawal, no matter how long it takes, a delineation of the border. The points along the border are very solvable, actually, between Lebanon and Israel. And so that is the point of this process now that's been launched. And I'm very excited for it. I have a lot of reason for hope for it. I think I'll end there because I believe that's where we are now. Now, the latest is just that people are working now behind the scenes to figure out what are the demands what are the demands the US is making of each side, what plan makes the most sense for a comprehensive deal, and how do we continue to undermine Hezbollah, which is trying to play spoiler, and it will continue to play spoiler. And so how do we make sure that they don't get to flex their muscles? So I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you for all of that. There is obviously, bringing us really up to speed. There's a great deal there's a great deal to discuss, and obviously there's, you unpacked a lot for us. I have a bunch of questions. I know Alex does as well. But let me start us off by, again, tapping into your knowledge of how Treasury and the tools that we have and sanctions and whatnot. So obviously we know about this complex dynamic happening in Lebanon, the tension that you've described correctly between the government, between UN and Hezbollah and everybody else that's happening on the ground. The other connecting point, kind of zooming out for a second, as far as the finances, as we know that the Trump administration is very obviously transactional in the finances, we know about the connection between Iran, Hezbollah's assets when it comes to Latin America, and
Mhm.
obviously a lot of the connectivity that's playing out here. So, from your vantage point, given what we also have done with Maduro and everything else that's playing out here, what other tools do we have financially as far as putting the continuous pressure on Hezbollah when it comes to the money trail that's coming in? Obviously, we're trying to asphyxiate that tie there between Iran and Hezbollah as well, but also from our side here as well, in order to kind of open up an artery that we can put pressure. And to a large extent, obviously, the larger goal: how do you free Lebanon from Hezbollah? So there could be a different arena in all of that.
Yeah. This is, I love anytime anybody asks me about the counter illicit finance angle or sanctions piece to something. It's one of my favorite topics. Um, this is a really important part. And I'm glad you mentioned Maduro and Venezuela because, uh, in general, we know that Venezuela was essentially a satellite for our biggest enemies. China was buying cheap Venezuelan oil and benefiting off of that. the Maduro is and the Cuban regime obviously support each other and their survivability. We know that the ties also between with Russia and Iran. And by the way, uh, projects that Russia was looking to potentially place weapons and missiles in Venezuela. And I don't want to sound like I'm repeating fear tactics from the Cold War here, but because I did a lot of television at the time of Venezuela, and when I was trying, at the time that Maduro was abducted, and when I was trying to explain this on TV, that Venezuela does pose a real national security threat. Um, and even though Trump was saying, "Oh, we were in it for the oil and the drugs," to limit this drug behavior and put the oil back on the market. Even I could see that that wasn't the real reason. I mean, that might be part of it, but the real reason was a geopolitical move. It was a geopolitical chess move, and it was about geopolitical competition. That we don't want our adversaries benefiting off of a country in our own backyard, and Hezbollah is one of them. Iran and Hezbollah are part of that. They had ties to the Venezuelan regime, including for Hezbollah specifically in the drug trade. But it's not just in Venezuela, by the way. Hezbollah is very active in Colombia, in Argentina, in Brazil, in Paraguay, in particularly it's the tri-border region of those areas where Hezbollah in general has been very good and sophisticated in terms of finding ways to finance itself beyond Iran. The Iran regime, we believe, remains its largest backer. So, and which is one of the reasons why I say that while the talks in Islamabad are not, they are deliberately separate. It would be remiss if I didn't mention the context in which the Lebanon-Israel peace talks are taking place, which is that they are taking place at the same time as an effort to undermine the Iranian regime. And whatever happens with the Iranian regime does directly affect what happens in Lebanon, because it dictates to Hezbollah how bold they might feel. But that said, if the money from Iran completely zeroes out, and in 2025, Iran sent $1 billion to Hezbollah over the course of 1 year. That's, by the way, with the airport conduit that they used to use mostly being shut down. That is with the land route over Syria mostly being shut down. Yes, there are loopholes and vulnerabilities, but still, they still found ways to finance themselves through, mainly actually from Iran, through using hawaladars in the UAE. Hawala is an informal financial system where, and it's not always illegal, by the way. It's like if you, Asaf, are sitting in Lebanon and I want to give you $1,000, it's sometimes the easiest and fastest way is for me to call my buddy up in Lebanon and say, "Hey, can you just give Asaf $1,000 in cash right now, and I'll put $1,000 in your account here in the United States." Now, that happens all the time, I can tell you. By the way, as somebody who has family in Lebanon, I can tell you it happens all the time. When you do it through a friend, that's not really called hawala, but there are known hawala dars, meaning kind of like storefront, store clerks. Maybe it's the bodega around the corner. And they do this kind of behavior, and people do it because it's fast, it's easy, there are no fees. Sometimes it's for completely illicit behavior, but it is also ideal for criminal actors because there's no trace of funds moving. Often it's cash, and there's literally no trace of the transaction. So the Iranians found a new way to do it through hawaladars in the UAE, sending money to Lebanon, also through crypto and through the Turkish border, and then also by sending literal suitcases full of cash to the VIP lounge of the airport in Beirut through the Iranian embassy. So Iranian diplomats and the Iranian ambassador, who would take these suitcases full of cash, because if they are flying private and they go through that VIP lounge, nothing is screened. Anyway, all this to say, if you got rid of all of that money from Iran, Hezbollah would still, while it would hit them hard, they still have these other financial networks. For example, businesses in West Africa that again seem licit but are sending money to Hezbollah. Drug trade, diamond trade, drug trade with Latin America. So they have all of these tentacles, if you will, that they have found ways to continue propping themselves up. And it cannot meet the amount that Iran is giving them. But it is why, when approaching this topic in general, and I say this often to policymakers, which is, it's not just about a peace deal. It's about ensuring that the Lebanese government has the freedom and space to pursue that peace deal and all the things that are needed to maintain and preserve peace. And in order to do that, Hezbollah has to be weakened as much as possible. And so all of the policies that the US government has always pursued against Hezbollah have to be amplified even further, meaning they need to throw the kitchen sink of sanctions at Hezbollah. They have not, by the way. There is a lot that is left to target. A lot. Trust me, I push on that list. It includes remaining now that we Hezbollah has come out in Lebanon so blatantly as an Iranian agent, and the Lebanese have declared their military and security operations as illegal. The US should go in there and sanction the two Hezbollah ministers in the cabinet because the Lebanese are not going to do it themselves. They should sanction the Hezbollah judges that have abused the military court to go after any opponent of Hezbollah, activists, dissidents, all sorts of, and sometimes just innocent civilians who, well, they're all innocent, by the way, but sometimes innocent civilians who've literally done nothing. So they need to sanction government officials that allow Hezbollah to influence the government and its judicial processes or processes in general. They need to sanction the cash companies, companies like Wish and OMT, that are allowing Hezbollah to freely raise, move, and store funds. When the war started, you had individuals directly tied to Hezbollah, and you had entities that are sanctioned by the United States, charities that are sanctioned by the United States, blatantly raising donations for the cause on social media using these cash companies. Like literally saying, at one point, Nasrallah's son came out with a video saying we need to raise funds for our effort. Here's our account at Wish Money, at a money service business. Now, Wish shut it down because it was embarrassing, but the fact is it's happening over and over again. And if you have a cash economy, Hezbollah is always going to find a way to raise, move, and store funds. So they need to do that. They need to continue sanctioning the remaining Hezbollah companies and charities that aren't yet sanctioned, that are actively raising money for Hezbollah. One of the ways that drives me crazy is that Hezbollah is involved in significant levels of tax evasion. And if the Lebanese are so afraid to go after them for terrorist financing, they should at least go after them for tax evasion, where Hezbollah brings in all sorts of goods into the ports of Beirut and Tripoli. They bring all these goods in. So even though the airport has been clamped down, not perfectly, but much better than it used to be, Hezbollah has full control over the ports. So they are either bringing goods in to sell. They don't pay customs or tax on it. They work around customs, no tax. They have these supermarket chains that sell Iranian goods for half the price of what the market has it at. So they're evading taxes, beating market prices, and raising funds for themselves. They're doing it with iPhones as well, thousands and thousands of iPhones, millions of iPhones. But that's also an obvious way to smuggle weapons in. If they're able to smuggle these goods in, then what else is in those goods? So there needs to be this like a very holistic and tough approach toward undermining all of Hezbollah's financial networks, influence in the government, and also improving the economic situation in Lebanon to favor the banks and not the cash companies, so that you can really eat at Hezbollah's ability to grow again. One of the things that somebody once told me in this process, because none of us involved in the peace effort believe that Hezbollah is going to become just a political party, that they're going to willingly give up their arms and become just a political party. And somebody told me, they said, if Hezbollah just becomes a terrorist group, we will have succeeded. And it sounds like a low bar, but it is somewhat true. If you get Hezbollah out of the government and out of its influence, and it becomes this kind of ragtag group with machine guns, and I'm not loving that, don't get me wrong, but it does mean that the Lebanese government would be able to finally take sovereign decisions in its own interest, including as it relates to peace.
As long as they're prompted on that note from help from us. I mean, as far as being able to actually function, as a strong government and who has support to actually make that happen. Just before I turn it over to Alex, I mean, I know he has questions as well, but on the whole, I love your angle, but as far as the whole exchange on the hallway, companies and whatnot, that was also done to avoid obviously all the issue with the SWIFT codes that we tried to attempt, to crack down on that, especially in Europe. I mean, Europe has a very different mentality. They, positively, you did see that, the EU designated Hezbollah and the IRGC as actual terrorist organizations. Is there any, Germany, which has all these Hezbollah hubs, post the last, Syrian war, that were brought in, is there anything that's, are they successful in any regard as far as cracking down on some of these charities? Are we doing a better job? I mean, who's doing, better, versus us and the Europeans and some of these cash businesses regarding Hezbollah?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. You all might not know me well, but if there's anything I'm known for, it's my candor. And Europe sucks on this effort, and they always sucked on this effort.
We know that. I just wanted to get your take on
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So when I was in government, by the way, and like I said, I worked on Hezbollah for a very long time. Yes, when I was at Treasury, but it continued afterward. The extent to which we had to beg Europe to sanction more than just the military wing of Hezbollah and explain to them that it's just a different view that we couldn't crack, where they would not sanction the political and social wings of Hezbollah. And I put that in quotes because it's all one and the same. And it all goes to the same goal. And that is, should be more than proven with the latest round. But to this day, France, for example, has not sanctioned the political and social wings of Hezbollah, meaning after everything that has happened, they still don't see a problem. If Hezbollah somehow has positions in the Lebanese government, if they continue to give services to the south, as though that's not in service of another more nefarious goal. I don't know why. Well, I have many reasons to believe that the French are weak on this. Some of it is a worldview because it's not just the French. It comes from the Germans too, as you've noted. Some of it is this kind of view that they believe is ultra democratic, which is like, oh, and that the US, you guys are a bunch of bullies. And their view is, this is part of the country. I can't tell you how many times a French person would tell me, oh, but the Hezbollah is part of the social fabric of Lebanon. They are part and parcel of the Lebanese society. No matter how much you tell them, this is an Iranian creation that when it was established, many people in the South and the Shia in particular, this was a foreign object to them. This was not an ideology that they ever followed. This came directly from the Iranian regime, and they got them by offering them money, literally just for free, giving the people in the South money. And we could talk into that. We could go into that further about how the Lebanese government left the South to and the Shia in particular to without giving them services, and that's what created this vacuum that Hezbollah could fill. But that said, the French had this view of like, oh, but they're part of the society, and there is no solution without Hezbollah. You have to negotiate with Hezbollah. They should be included. Again, this is why nobody wanted the French involved in these peace talks. The French are also just generally anti-Semitic, by the way, and very anti-Israel. And if they're not anti-Semitic, they're blatantly anti-Israel. Often it goes hand in hand.
Right.
And that's
And they,
also why nobody wanted them.
and they make the same distinction when it comes to the civil society, so-called, and the military wing when it comes to Hamas as well. I mean,
100%.
the
Yes.
Islamists, they don't understand Islamist groups altogether.
Yeah.
But
And that allows these organizations to recruit people, to spread extremism, and to raise move and store funds. It's literally asinine. Like by not sanctioning the political and social wings, literal charities of both Hezbollah and Hamas, by the way, it allows them to do, it's not just like, oh, we're raising money for orphans, which by the way, they're not. But even if let's pretend that they were doing that, and let's pretend that 100% of it were going to said orphans, which is not happening, it still services a larger terrorist goal. But it means you have an operating entity in the country that allows them to infiltrate mosques, to create cells, to cause problems, to fundraise and recruit. And it is so not well understood the extent to which Hezbollah seeks terrorist operations, pursues terrorist operations around the world. And I don't understand why. I mean, among this group, we're all going to understand that. But the attack that happened in the synagogue against the synagogue in Michigan weeks ago was a Hezbollah guy, right? The attack against Salman Rushdie in the United States it was painted as a lone wolf. It was a Hezbollah operative, and it was thanks to Jay Solomon, an investigation he did. And that guy has now been charged with material support to Hezbollah. But why on earth would people around the world believe that Hezbollah is also an active global terrorist
Or
organization?
the long arm of Iran for the past 47 years. I mean, we have
Yeah,
all these documents, and by the way, Jay's study did a great job on that.
yeah. I haven't even gotten into their attacks in Argentina, obviously against the Marine barracks bombing, and
Right.
I haven't even got, and then the failed attempts that they've had in Thailand and elsewhere. I mean, it is a global terrorist organization, and they want to be viewed as such because they want people to be afraid.
100%. Alex, I know you have some questions too for our friend.
Yeah, I want to ask a very simple question. Before I have a very complicated question, but I'll wait with that. Who disarms Hezbollah?
I
Now we
feel
had a
like
wonderful suggestion last week from the eminent Tom Friedman that NATO do it, but barring this, barring this, who actually goes in there and does it?
Um, well, I would love NATO to do it, and I think the argument could absolutely be made for NATO to do it. I just don't think they're going to. I think that's unrealistic, um, particularly given the demands with Ukraine and the view of Europe in general right now on this region. They're basically like in a coma, unless it involves wanting to angle their way into some kind of peace talks like France. I just don't see them being very awake to the threats coming from this region. So I just don't think it's very realistic to think that NATO would be doing it. Um, though I love the suggestion. It needs to be a more beefed up effort by the LAF and IDF together. And you already have precedent for that. So the mechanism that was set up after November 2024, it set the system up where basically the system was that the Israelis would give the coordinates of where they knew Hezbollah weapons to be. It would go to the US. The US would pass it on to the LAF, to the Lebanese Armed Forces. And the Lebanese Armed Forces had 72 hours to destroy or seize those weapons. And if they didn't, then Israel would strike those weapons, and the Lebanese largely looked the other way. So this system was working actually for a while until, again, Hezbollah adapted, found ways to rearm itself, found sympathizers within the military that they could sway, blah, 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 right? So now we're back to square one a little bit, and that relationship could be refashioned to be tighter. So first of all, let it be direct, a direct LAF and IDF relationship that is direct. Um, Cooperation that's closer with the US, of course, as well. And so, yes, you need the Lebanese Armed Forces to carry out a lot of it because it doesn't work for the Lebanese itself, like as a sovereign nation, especially if the government wants to sell peace with Israel, pursue a comprehensive solution. You can't just let Israel do all of it. But the fact is that you're going to need this closer LAF IDF relationship with the United States, operations that might be joint instead of just passing it to the LAF. And I'm telling you, this is my opinion at least. And and all of that coupled with all of the other efforts that you're going to pursue toward peace, like getting rid of Lebanon's criminalization laws, for example, so that the Lebanese feel comfortable working with Israelis generally, but also where you have continued strikes. And the ceasefire agreement that was signed on April 16th, 2 days after the first peace talks. If you look it up, it's on State Department's website. If you actually read it, it is remarkable what's in there. And the press really overlooked it. Like, oh, there's a ceasefire, how great. But the language in that it was deliberately done, I can tell you this, to be very meaty. So first of all, it declares an end to the state of war between both countries, which is huge. It says it gives Israel right to preempt or respond to Hezbollah attacks. As we all know here, the word preempt is very vague, deliberately vague. It says that they will work together on disarmament. Now they're figuring out how that relationship would look. But I just don't see, A, I don't see a role for NATO, and B, you could fashion a role for monitors and inspectors who are foreign, not the UN. Nobody wants to see the UN. I say nobody. I mean, the French want to see the UN. The Lebanese, Israelis, and the US, none of them want to see an extension of UNIFIL. None of them want to see the blue hat in the South. And the reason for that is that they oversaw Hezbollah's growth in the South blatantly. They were, yes, they're not, their job was not to take on Hezbollah fighters, but they were at least supposed to report when they saw Hezbollah moving weapons, storing weapons. And we know the list of transgressions where they saw it and didn't report anything. So not the UN, but you could fashion, I actually do think there could be a role for Europe in that regard, especially if you want to throw them a bone and give them a role, where you could see something where their troops monitor a secure situation that the Lebanese, US, and Israelis have already achieved. And then you bring them in for things like monitoring, inspecting, and also for job creation in the South, right? Give them something like that. That they can do. That's how I foresee a successful role, but it is going to require continued strikes. And I view that as part of the ceasefire.
Well, there were a couple of dozen strikes this morning,
Good.
and so that part of the ceasefire is working out very well,
Yes.
I
Listen,
guess.
I tell people all the time, I know I sound like Rumsfeld. When I was, and I will tell you, I am not a warmonger on everything. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I was the first person out there to say that we, the US, should give Ukraine everything so that we could immediately pivot to peace, to negotiations. And the reason was because I had experience handling Bashar al-Assad, and I know the type of wars that these dictators can pursue. So I know I sound like Rumsfeld on this. I just believe in if you're gonna have peace, you have to have continued strikes and ceasefires. Are there many ceasefires have phases of violence? It doesn't mean the ceasefire doesn't hold. It just means it's a violent phase in the ceasefire, and that's a fact of history. So yes, so I'm glad
Well,
to
it's
hear
a
the
Middle
dozen
Eastern
strikes this
style
morning.
ceasefire,
A
which is
violent phase. I
that
like that. Yes.
you know, not everyone is shooting all at once.
Hmm.
Somebody's making the coffee during the ceasefire. Um, well, let me raise one more fundamental question, which is something that Asaf and I have talked about with a number of our guests who think about Lebanon, specialize in Lebanon, and that is how is Lebanon even a state?
Does
Um,
that question come up?
all the time.
Well
Like
done.
how it was created?
No, no, not how was it created? How and why should it be considered a state as
Mm,
opposed to a container for various groups of peoples, all armed, who hate each other,
mm,
and who have a tradition for almost 200 years of killing each other in vast numbers?
mm,
Which is to say, why should this still be an operative concept that America should invest its time in, and that Israel should invest its time in negotiating as opposed to unilaterally in some fashion, redrawing its own borders, extending protection or creating relationships with sympathetic minorities, as it has done with the Druze in
mm,
southwestern Syria, and letting the rest of Lebanon um, go to hell. I mean, Hezbollah is
mm,
is a transnational. It's an ideological transnational crime organization which has its
mhm.
major patron in another, 1,000 miles or whatever to the east.
Yeah.
Why should they even be part of the equation as opposed to something that should be destroyed to the extent possible,
Mm,
marginalized and contained? And the whole premise of Lebanon as this confessional entity,
mhm.
which hasn't really worked so great in
No, that's for
in
sure.
in the
Yeah.
last 200 years.
That's for sure. I don't think that yeah. Well, we could get into that as well. All right. There's a lot in there. So first on Hezbollah, yes, you are completely accurate in describing it. It is a terrorist organization. It is an Iranian proxy, and it is absolutely an organized crime syndicate. Um,
But
and
it's an ideological one.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100% ideological. And this is one of the things I say, why I don't really believe much will come from talks with the Iranian regime because they are ideological. These are fanatics. They believe their upper echelon, the clerics, and their ethos is that, and this is what how they came to power in 1979 was we are against the oppressor, we are against the West, and we believe that Islam is the way to do it, to achieve that goal. And we believe that by creating chaos and causing chaos, their Imam Mahdi will appear. So that's how do you even rationalize with that? You can't. Their goals are clear. Hezbollah's goals are clear. There is no such thing. That's why I say there's no such thing as Hezbollah, the political party that disarms and decides to become actually a Lebanese entity. But that is why they've been completely marginalized from, they're certainly not involved in anything related to talks. But they are becoming increasingly marginalized in Lebanon, and the US policy is to force that marginalization even further. So you are already seeing, for example, like I mentioned, Naim Qassem trying to say, like, oh, Lebanon can't participate in these talks, and Joseph Aoun basically giving Naim Qassem the finger and being like, yeah, nope, whatever you say, I'm not going to listen to. It's not up to you. So you do, thankfully now, decades too late, you do see the Lebanese government finally sort of growing some balls and starting to push back on Hezbollah in a way that they should have been doing all this whole time. Sometimes when the Lebanese tell me, like, oh, you can't push this goal because it'll cause civil war, blah, blah, blah. And I always tell them, I'm like, you have to realize how not normal it is to allow a foreign aid entity in your country to arm itself and then threaten everybody in the country. Yes, you should go drag out the Iranian ambassador and put him on a plane and put him back. They PNG'd the Iranian ambassador, for example, and the Iranian ambassador said, no, I'm staying right here. Okay, get in there with the military, drag him out and put him on a plane. That's what would happen in any other country. This is not normal. It's hard for them to kind of break that habit. So we could go into the weakness of Lebanon and the government as a state and how it allowed Hezbollah to flourish, because there are many mistakes that the Lebanese made for sure over and over again that only allowed them to flourish further. But the Lebanese but what you're proposing is not very realistic, because like the idea or the notion that you had, this theory that you're talking about, it's not very realistic because it's not to say that the Israelis wouldn't find like-minded and kindred spirit in Lebanon. It's not going to be the Druze, I'll tell you that much. The Druze in Lebanon are completely different than the Druze in Israel and Syria. And they are loudly and annoyingly anti-Israel, actually, thanks to their idiotic leader, Walid Jumblat. His arm, he'll get on the peace train when he sees that it's inevitable, by the way, because that's what he does. But if you're talking about like the South is majority Shia and then some Christian. If the Israelis were to even try to like reconfigure it where the only people who could come back to the South are of a certain confession, or those who at least pledge that they're comfortable with Israel and would work with Israel, it just doesn't get anywhere. It just means that the border with Hezbollah, that it just first of all, it furthers the resistance argument to take any land. And we know the Israelis have no claim over Lebanese land, and they say this over and over again, and that is very important from a PR perspective. They have to keep saying that. They do say it constantly. The Israeli ambassador said it in peace talks. I believe Netanyahu has said it himself. They have no claims over Israeli territory. They just have to delineate the border better in a way that it's not so much even delineating it as much as making sure that their security needs, Israel's security needs are met on the border because of the hilltops that exist that are in Lebanon. And so, but if they did what you're talking about, it would just further the resistance argument. It would piss off, millions of Lebanese, and you would just face Hezbollah further north, because that would only push it would make many Lebanese say, actually, no, never mind, we need Hezbollah then. We can't lose our land.
Well, I just want to clarify, I'm not proposing this.
Yeah.
I mean,
But yeah, I hear like Smotrich and Ben Gvir sometimes say stuff like this, right? Is
well,
that right?
I don't want to be aligned necessarily with with those
Another,
guys.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a fundamental point that who are Israelis, Americans supposed to be negotiating with?
Mm.
Really, Hezbollah is part of the government. It's part of the army. It's part of
It's not part of the army.
well, the
And
Shiites are
it's
part of the army.
yeah, the Shia are
There are
part of the army, of
Shia
course. Yeah.
brigades,
Yes, they are a large part of the army. Many of whom,
and the
yeah.
Americans pay for the army.
Yes.
So that does that make it a Lebanese army, or does that in some sense make it an American army or an American proxy army?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think my point is that it's just not clear who, and I certainly am old enough to remember when Syria occupied pretty much all of Lebanon
For 20
uh,
years. Yeah.
for a long time, and not a solution that anybody would propose today
Yeah.
by any means.
No. Tom Barrack tried. That is like nails on a chalkboard to any Lebanese to hear anything Syrian related. The thing that, Lebanon is such a complicated place because I think you're right. Like, I think to the layperson, it might seem weird. Like, well, wait a minute. They have two ministers in the cabinet, which means they are part of the government, but certainly not enough to sway policy anymore. They used to have more. So already it's an improvement. They have 14 members in the parliament. The parliament is divided in a confessional way. As you mentioned, it's a weird system. There are 128 seats. They're divided equally for Christian, Sunni, and Shia. So the Shia have 27 seats. 14 of those are held by Hezbollah. And so that is also important to know that not all Shia are Hezbollah, and you have an increasing number of Shia that are really angry at Hezbollah, actually. Now, the other main political party for the Shia, Amal, has always been the steward for Hezbollah. I'm not trying to pretend that they are against Hezbollah, but you do now see steps taken by Nabi Berri, the leader of Amal, who's the current Speaker of the House, who's, by the way, like, he's the worst. I'm not trying to make it seem like he's a good guy in any way, shape, or form. He has absolutely enabled Hezbollah, but you see him now because he sees the way the wind is blowing, and he doesn't want to lose power and control over all of the Shia. He sees them getting increasingly angry at Hezbollah. So you see him now, like, not getting in the way of anything peace related, being somewhat silent on things, certainly not siding with Hezbollah. So you see these movements. But that said, there is a lot of the state to work with that isn't Hezbollah. And that's been the biggest talking point that the US and Israel have been trying to emphasize in these peace talks and you heard Trump say it, you heard Marco Rubio say it in the first talks, is these talks are between Israel and Lebanon and not Hezbollah. And this is about isolating, the exact words Trump used were, we want to help Lebanon protect itself from Hezbollah. So the goal in these peace talks is to marginalize them. Hezbollah has zero role whatsoever in them. They're not involved in them in any cabinet decision. The two ministers have stepped out. So they're not involved at all. And now there'll be an increased effort to sanction them and expose them and marginalize them even further. And that's what makes peace with Lebanon so much more of an opportunity than in Gaza, for example, or with the Palestinians, because you have a real partner there that is not Hezbollah and also hates Hezbollah. They now have a common enemy, and the Lebanese are finally getting strong enough to say, you know what? Yeah, we don't want Hezbollah either, and we are willing to work with you on this. And that is a fine balance there, because in Lebanon, you've always had people hate Hezbollah. The majority of Lebanese hate Hezbollah. As it is, if you look at the Christians and Sunni together, they make up more than the Shia. So inherently, the majority hate Hezbollah. But some of them might have hated Israel more. And so they were never really out there in pushing for peace, or that's changed now. That whole rubric, that balance has completely shifted over this last war, which is, I hate Hezbollah more now. And so okay, clearly we do need to work with Israel. I might not like them. And I'm not saying that the majority feel that way either. You also have a majority that are pro-Israel. Sorry, not a majority. You have many who are pro-Israel and want a peace agreement that would include normalization and so on. And you have others that are more wary and are like, okay, listen, we have a common enemy. We just want peace. We don't want to live in the shadow of violence. Let's have peace, and then we'll work on normalization after. Um, but that said, that there is an actual partner there and a unique window of time and opportunity for the Israelis as well to seize that because it solves a long-term solution for them so that they don't have to go to war with Hezbollah every other year and they don't have to spend that money. And also for the US. The US having Israel as our one of our most important allies in the world and certainly our most important ally in the Middle East. We don't want Israel having this threat at their border either. And solving it once and for all would be a much greater initiative than having to do this, like I said, every other year.
Great. So, Hagar, let's hope for that the dose of optimism that you have, which we like.
We'll end on a hopeful note.
We need
Yes, you should have hope. Peace is
we,
coming.
we need a lot more optimism when it comes to the Middle East, and besides playing whack-a-mole all day long on how things work. But really, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it. I know you're swamped. There's definitely so much to talk about, so we appreciate taking the time to talk to us and all of us this afternoon. I want to thank Alex as always for joining me, everybody who joined us this afternoon, and hopefully, Hagar, you can come back. Obviously, things are changing rapidly, so we'd love to have you back again. And look forward to continuing the conversation. So let's hope for that optimism, and I hope everybody has a good day as well. And the best part we can do.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope the next time I'm on, we will be closer to a peace deal or we will have had
All good. We hope. Take
Thanks
care. Have a
very
good
much.
day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.